I feel like over the last couple of days, Crystal Palace have been receiving some heat from mainstream media in regards to Marc Guéhi, or rather not selling Marc Guéhi during the summer transfer window, because it was all set up on deadline day, wasn't it? Liverpool chased him all summer, and finally on deadline day it looked like they were going to get their man. A £35 million transfer fee was agreed between Crystal Palace and Liverpool. Marc Guéhi had gone and done his Liverpool medical. Everything was set up. It wasn't that he was likely to join Liverpool. It was he was expected to join Liverpool. And it went right to the wire, so much so that Liverpool had to put in a deal sheet to get permission to conclude the deal past the 7 p.m. transfer deadline day. And right at the last minute, Crystal Palace pulled the plug due to having no replacement for Marc Guéhi. They tried to replace him with the likes of Igor from Brighton, but they failed. So the result was Marc Guéhi could not get his move to Liverpool and he would remain at Crystal Palace. As a result of that, I think has seen a lot of criticism pointed towards Crystal Palace from some journalists and from some ex-players and pundits, describing it as a really bad business deal. I disagree. Now, obviously, we look at it financially and purely through the prism of money, then yes, it's a bad business deal. Summer 2024, just over 12 months ago, they were offered allegedly 70 million from Newcastle United for Marc Guéhi. Newcastle United really wanted him last summer. 60, 70 million, depending on who and what you believe. Newcastle, that was one of their main priorities, and Crystal Palace rejected it. This summer, they rejected 35 million from Liverpool. Yes, the circumstances weren't great, but they could have sold him for 35 million. The expectation now is he will walk out of Crystal Palace for free next summer once his contract expires. So in the space of 2 years, from last summer to next summer, Crystal Palace have lost up to £70 million as a transfer fee for Marc Guéhi. So if you want to look at it like that, through that angle, and remove all the context, then yes, it's a bad business decision from Crystal Palace. However, I want to discuss today as to why I don't think it's a bad decision by Crystal Palace. I don't think it's a bad decision at all, because you need to include the context, and there's a lot of it, but we're going to go through it. However, before I get into it, if you're new to Tartan Geo, please do subscribe, and also please do drop a like on the video as well by clicking the thumbs up button. Thank you very much for your support, and pleased to have you with me. Right then, I want to go back to last summer, because this is where it starts really, isn't it? When it became quite clear, I think, that Marc Guéhi wasn't going to sign a contract extension at Crystal Palace. There was a lot of interest from Newcastle in him. But Crystal Palace that summer had sold Elise to Bayern Munich, and they'd also sold Anderson to Fulham because of his contract situation. So Crystal Palace had already sold two very important players and received a lot of money during that summer transfer window. So to sell a other key player such as Marc Guéhi would have been, I don't want to say suicidal, but it would have been a bad decision. I think they'd already lost two important players in Anderson and Elise, and if they could keep it to two, that would have been good. They did that. So yes, they've lost out on money, but they retained Marc Guéhi, and I think it was important after selling Anderson in particular that they did just that. Then look at the season they've just had. They won the FA Cup. And this is the bit I just cannot and will not get my head around. And I do think I may be guilty of the opposite here. I think there's a bit of traditional six, Sky Sports 6. I think there's a sense of entitlement. And it's not necessarily from Liverpool fans. I think it's from ex-players. And I think that's what's disappointing. I've seen some ex-players who didn't even play for one of the top six feel, and I just get this vibe of entitlement. Oh, well, he should have gone. Liverpool wanted him. He should have went to Liverpool. Why are Crystal Palace standing in his way of success? Well, probably because he's got a contract with them. And there's almost this aura of entitlement. The same with Isak. It was like, well, why are Newcastle not selling Isak to Liverpool? Liverpool want him. They've got to sell him. I dislike it. But I don't know if I'm just guilty of the other side of the coin. So I look at it as entitlement from those six. Maybe I'm just a victim of the other 14. Maybe I've got a victim mentality as part of the other 14 in the Premier League. Maybe I'm the one that's guilty rather than them. And because I have that victim mentality, I don't think I do, I don't mean to, but maybe I do. And as a result of that, maybe I view it as entitlement. But I think because of the almost attitude I'm detecting, I get a bit offended. I get a little bit defensive of Crystal Palace in this regards, because to say it's a bad business decision, I think you have to ignore a lot of stuff. And I appreciate some of it's going to be based on gossip. Some of it's going to be smaller things. But one thing you just cannot ignore at all. Crystal Palace won the FA Cup. Marc Guéhi was an important part of that. Marc Guéhi was the captain of the Palace team that won the FA Cup at Wembley. Yes, they might have lost 60, 70 million, but look what they've gained. They've got something that's priceless, absolute priceless. They also won the Charity Shield, the Community Shield, and I appreciate people will mock that. I get it, right? I do get it. I understand if you support Chelsea, Man City, or Liverpool, I understand why the Community Shield means nothing to you. Glorified, friendly. I get why you would look at it like that, because it's normal for your club to play in this match. It's normal to see your team every few years win one of the FA Cup or Premier League and then go play for the Community Shield. And if you lose it, big deal. You've got bigger problems, you've got bigger trophies to go win. When you're Crystal Palace, you do not. Winning the Community Shield, I assume, was a big deal to Crystal Palace fans. Because if West Ham won the Community Shield, I would look at it as a big deal. I wouldn't look at it as a glorified friendly. Would I consider it a major trophy? No. But I'd consider it an achievement. I'd consider it a memory, something that I'll never, ever forget. So as far as I'm concerned, in the last 14 months between Crystal Palace being offered 60, 70 million for Marc Guéhi and 35 million for Marc Guéhi, they've won the FA Cup and they've also won the Community Shield. They've had 2 fantastic days out at Wembley. 2 days I don't think their fans will ever, ever forget. And what price you putting on that? I think it's easy to sit there as a pundit and say, oh, bad business decision. Well, actually, I think the trade-off, which is losing all that money, but you gain those 2 days, you gain those 2 wins, I think it's a good business decision. Marc Guéhi was important to Crystal Palace. He was important to Crystal Palace success last season. And I don't think you can put a price on that. Not at all. And I think to call it a bad business decision, you've really got to ignore what Crystal Palace achieved last season. And that's without looking ahead to the next 12 months. But I'm going to do that as well, because it's important. And it's really, really important as well. They've got a European campaign coming up. And I appreciate, again, fans of those 6 will dismiss the Conference League. I get it. You don't need to explain it to me. You want to see your team win the Champions League. You don't see the Conference League as a serious competition. That's okay. I get it. Do you know how I get it? Because I don't see the EFL trophy as a serious competition. We don't even compete in it. We being West Ham. We don't even compete in it. Right? I don't even know what it's called anymore. The Johnson's Paint Trophy is what it used to be called. That one for the League 1 and League 2 sides. That trophy's big for clubs participating in it. I would never dare look at a fan of one of those clubs and say, that trophy, pathetic, nothing. Because it's not. It might not mean anything to me as a West Ham fan, but it doesn't mean it means nothing. It should mean nothing to those. It should still mean a lot to those. Whoever goes on and wins it, fantastic. That's why the Conference League trophy to West Ham, to Crystal Palace, we are allowed to think it's a big deal. We're allowed to think it's a major trophy for us because it is. It's the only trophy I've ever seen us win. It won't be the only trophy Crystal Palace ever seen them. They might not win it, but they've won the FA Cup as well to get in there. Well, to get in the Europa League and then get ratcheted down. Conversation for a different day. But you get my point. I understand if Chelsea didn't see winning the Conference League as a big deal a few months ago. I get it. But it doesn't mean it won't be a big deal for Crystal Palace if they go on and lift it. It'll be a huge deal for Crystal Palace. And so it should be. And I hope they do go on and win it. And you know what? I think they will as well. And one of those reasons I think they've got a good chance of winning it is because Marc Guéhi is still at that football club. He would have been difficult to replace, not just as a footballer, not just as a centre-back, but as a captain, as a person, as part of that squad. Really good squad as well. Under Glasner. We'll get on to that. I think it was important Parish kept Guéhi at that club, because Crystal Palace, as a result, they might have lost out on 35 million, absolutely. But you know what they might have gained? The chance of winning the Europa Conference League this season. They might have done. Maybe they won't, but they are one of the favourites, if not the favourite. And I think every English club that enters it should be one of the favourites to win it. And your expectation should be that you do go on and win it. But if I rein back into this summer only, Steve Parish said we need to sell him or we need to sign a new contract. That is what the chairman of Crystal Palace said in regards to Marc Guéhi. And this was quite some time ago. This was around the Community Shield, actually. I think it might have even been before or after that match in particular. He said that. Now, Crystal Palace are not completely innocent. Steve Parish aren't completely innocent. It's not to say they've done nothing wrong. I absolutely think they've botched this. They should have got this sorted. They should have had a replacement for Marc Guéhi as soon as the transfer window opened, because it was no secret they were likely going to have to sell him. Parish himself alluded to it 2 or 3 weeks ago at Wembley on that day. So they knew they needed a centre-back. They knew they needed a replacement for Marc Guéhi. So I have little to no sympathy that they've lost out on Igor on transfer deadline day. And it's not because he'd come to West Ham. I don't really like him as a player. I don't think he's a good transfer for West Ham. I don't think he would have been a good transfer for Crystal Palace. But to try and bring someone in on transfer deadline day is just leaving it way too late. So there's certainly valid criticisms to be thrown at Crystal Palace there, which is, why did you not sort this in July? You should have been sorting this in July. You should have got Marc Guéhi's replacement in first thing. But they couldn't. Well, they could have, but one of the big issues Crystal Palace had, they didn't know which European competition they were going to be competed in. One of their owners was trying to sell the shares in Crystal Palace. He managed it in the end, but that's a disruption. They didn't know if they were in the Europa League or the Conference League. That's a disruption. There's a massive financial difference between the two competitions. Never mind the pool for the player as well. All you have to do is look at Nottingham Forest business. On the Monday they found out, bang, signing, because they knew which competition they were going to be in. They knew what they could go spend. So Crystal Palace were impacted until very late on in the window with that. However, I think they should have still solved this one earlier. But Oliver Glasner has been very vocal about retaining Marc Guéhi. Glasner was not saying, oh, if we sell him, we need to replace him. That was not his stance. That was the stance of Steve Parish. The chairman's stance was sell him or new contract. He's done neither. The manager's stance was he stays. Now, there was a lot of talk that if Crystal Palace sold Marc Guéhi, Glasner was going to walk. Now, we don't know if that's true, okay? That could just be rumours. But given how vocal Glasner was about retaining Marc Guéhi, that would suggest to me that there's maybe some merit in those rumours that Glasner potentially would have walked out of Crystal Palace if his captain was sold, because he would have been sold against his wishes. Parish would have had to go against his manager. If, and this is a big if, I'm willing to concede that this next part may not be true, okay? If those rumours were true, and ultimately Steve Parish is there on deadline day thinking, if I sell Guéhi, I'm going to lose my manager. I'll tell you something now, that would have been a bad business decision. Accepting 35 million for Marc Guéhi with the knowledge your manager's going to walk out the door. And he's a bloody good one too. If it was a crap manager, you'd say, well, you'll replace him easy enough. I'm not so sure. Because Parish would have been looking at a set of circumstances where Marc Guéhi's left, the captain's gone, one of their most important players is just gone, the manager's gone. Yeah, okay, there's 35 million in the bank, but now what? Would it be extreme to suggest that had Glasner walked out and they sold Guéhi and didn't replace him, would it be extreme to suggest there could be a relegation battle for Crystal Palace? Feels extreme, but had they got the appointment incorrect, you don't know. With a European campaign as well, it would have been a difficult season. I would argue that retaining Oliver Glasner, whose contract expires next summer as well, by the way, and this is the thing, Parish was in a difficult position. I've got a lot, like I said, I've got criticisms. He should have dealt with it sooner. But in the last 24 hours of the transfer window, Parish is in between a rock and a hard place, one of which he's put himself there. But do you sell Guéhi and cash in? or do you retain him and let him walk out for free, knowing that your manager currently also is walking out at the end of the season? He may sign a new contract at Selhurst Park, but I think the chance of him signing a contract at Selhurst Park would have been slimmer had he sold Marc Guéhi to Liverpool on deadline day against his wishes. So I have a little bit of sympathy for Parish, not a complete lot. But this is the context I think has been completely stripped out of, did Crystal Palace make a bad business decision? Because if, and it is a big if Crystal Palace go on and win the Conference League, and I think it's possible, I think it's realistic. West Ham earned about 13-ish million, just over 13 million West Ham earned by winning the Conference League in prize money alone. Chelsea was 15 million. So go with what Chelsea earned, 15 million. It depends on how many games you win, how many you draw, etc., etc. You win all your group games, you're going to get a bit more money than compared to winning 4 and drawing 2, right? But there's between 13 and 15 million pounds up for grabs. If Crystal Palace win the Conference League, that will be their prize money. And then there's additional ticket revenue, there's additional merchandise on top of all that. So actually, Crystal Palace could be looking at, I don't know, 15, 20 million pounds in prize money just from the European tournament alone if they go on and win it. Well, they've got a better chance of winning it with Marc Guéhi than they do if they sold Marc Guéhi. So actually, if they go on and win that Conference League and he has a big part of it, and I appreciate I may be stretching here a little bit, arguably it's still a good business decision. Because not only do you get all that prize money, you also get into the Europa League for the following season. It will give Crystal Palace a second consecutive season playing European football. The prize money up for grabs in Europa League is greater. There's a possibility that in prize money in European football alone would come to a similar fee of 35 million that they would have got from Marc Guéhi. Going forward, Crystal Palace's best chance of retaining success and building on what they've achieved by winning the FA Cup is to go on and win the Conference League. So, my conclusion, did Crystal Palace mess up? Yes. They should have dealt with this much earlier in the transfer window. But the minute it got to transfer deadline day, it just was a no-go. Unless they had someone fantastic lined up, they could not sell Marc Guéhi. Is it a bad business decision? Financially, yes. But you've really got to ignore everything that's happened between then and now. And I appreciate maybe now would have been the right time to sell him for 35 million because you've already won the FA Cup. So that difference of 60, 70 from Newcastle, 35 for Liverpool, maybe it would have been worth giving up that 25 million because you won the FA Cup. I think to almost justify it, Crystal Palace have now got to go on and win the Conference League and obviously not get relegated. But if they do that, if they achieve that, I would argue there's a small chance Marc Guéhi might extend his contract to Crystal Palace. Say, well, do you know what? Actually, we've got Europa League football now. I've just won another trophy with Crystal Palace. That might be enough to get him to commit his future to the club. I appreciate that's unlikely to happen, and it's more than likely he does leave and he goes to Liverpool and he'll get his move eventually. You'll have quite a few options, I'd imagine, next summer. Newcastle might come back in from as a free agent. I'd imagine there'll be a lot of clubs lining up. So is that a bad business decision? Only if you ignore the context.